The hum of the fluorescent lights in the hallways of Elmwood Gardens was the soundtrack to my life. It was a low, constant drone that I'd learned to tune out, much like the faint scent of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee that clung to my scrubs. For 6 years, I'd walked these polished linoleum floors as a registered nurse. My world was a predictable loop of medication schedules, soft food diets, and the quiet, slow-motion dramas of the elderly. I was good at my job. I knew who liked their tea with 2 sugars and who needed their pillows fluffed just so. I could calm a sundowning patient with a soft voice and a steady hand. I was a professional, a caretaker. It was a role I inhabited so completely that I often felt the real me, the one who existed outside these walls, was just a faint echo. My life was here, measured in 12-hour shifts. The routine was a comfort, a fortress against the messiness of the world, and against the messiness of my own life. The fortress, however, had one persistent breach: my parents. A call from my mother would come like clockwork every Sunday evening. A gentle, probing inquiry that felt more like an accusation. "We saw your cousin this weekend, Sarah. He brought the kids over. It was lovely," she'd say, the unspoken "where were you?" hanging heavy in the air. I'd offer the same tired excuses. A long week, an extra shift, the crushing exhaustion that settled deep in my bones after wrestling with bedpans and mortality. "You work too hard," my father would grumble in the background, his version of "I miss you," and the guilt would gnaw at me, a dull, familiar ache. They were right, of course. I hadn't visited in months. The 2-hour drive felt like crossing an ocean. It was easier to send flowers on birthdays and money on holidays, easier to keep that part of my life at a safe, clinical distance. It was easier to care for strangers than to face the quiet disappointment in the eyes of the 2 people who gave me everything. I told myself I was needed here more. At Elmwood, I was competent, essential. At my parents' house, I was just their daughter who was never there. The night it happened started like any other Tuesday. A game of bingo in the common room had just wrapped up, and I was doing my final rounds. Mr. Henderson in 3B was complaining about the draft. Mrs. Gable in 2A wanted another blanket, and Mr. Arthur Finch in 4C was asleep in his armchair, a half-finished crossword puzzle resting on his chest. Arthur was my favorite, a retired history professor with eyes that still held a mischievous twinkle, even as his body failed him. He'd lost his wife a year ago and his children lived across the country. He rarely had visitors, but he never complained. We had a silent understanding, a bond forged in late-night chats about Roman aqueducts and the best way to brew tea. He reminded me of my own father, both in his stubborn pride and the gentle way he'd pat my hand and say, "You're a good kid." I adjusted his blanket, switched off his reading lamp, and quietly closed his door. As I walked back to the nurse's station, a strange smell hit me. It wasn't the usual scent of Elmwood. It was acrid, sharp, like burnt plastic. I dismissed it at first. Someone probably left a kettle on. But then I saw it. A faint, hazy whisper of smoke curling from beneath the door of the linen closet at the far end of the hall. For a second, I froze. My mind refused to process it. It was a glitch in the routine, an anomaly that didn't belong in my predictable world. Then, the shrill, deafening scream of the fire alarm shattered the quiet, and my training kicked in, a cold wave of adrenaline washing over me. The hum of the lights was gone, replaced by a pulsing, electronic shriek and the first panicked shouts from the residents. The routine was broken. My world was on fire. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. My instincts took over, a checklist of emergency protocols running through my mind. Evacuate, contain, alert. The smoke thickened with terrifying speed, turning the familiar hallway into a hazy, surreal nightmare. The flashing emergency lights painted everything in strobes of red, making the scene feel like a horror movie. My voice became hoarse from shouting instructions, my words swallowed by the relentless din of the alarm. Stay calm. Follow me. Cover your mouths. I moved from room to room, my heart pounding against my ribs. I was a machine, efficient and detached, focusing on the task at hand. Get them out. Get them all out. The faces of my patients, usually so placid, were now masks of terror. I saw raw, unfiltered fear in their eyes, and it mirrored the knot tightening in my own stomach. We were getting the west wing cleared, moving residents toward the fire escape, when a terrifying realization hit me. Arthur. Room 4C was at the end of the hall, closer to the source of the smoke. In the methodical sweep, we hadn't reached his section yet. A wave of nausea washed over me. I pictured him asleep in his chair, the crossword puzzle still on his lap. My protocol, my training, screamed at me to stick with the main group, to not break formation, to let the firefighters who were surely on their way handle the more dangerous areas. But the image of his gentle, trusting face flashed in my mind. He reminded me of my dad, sitting in his own worn armchair back home, waiting for a daughter who never came. It wasn't a thought. It was a physical blow. The professional detachment I'd so carefully constructed crumbled into dust. This wasn't about protocols anymore. I turned to a younger aide, Maria, her face pale and smudged with soot. "Keep them moving. Don't stop for anything." I yelled over the alarm, my voice cracking. Before she could protest, I turned and ran back into the thickening smoke, my lungs burning with each ragged breath. The hallway was a tunnel of gray and orange. The heat was immense, pressing in on me, sucking the air from my lungs. The fire had broken out of the linen closet and was greedily licking at the walls. It was like running into the throat of a dragon. I reached 4C and threw the door open. The room was thick with smoke, but blessedly, the flames hadn't reached it yet. Arthur was awake, coughing violently, trying to get out of his chair. He was confused, disoriented. "Sarah? What's happening?" he gasped, his voice thin and reedy. "There's a fire, Arthur. We have to go. Now," I said, trying to keep my own panic from my voice. I grabbed his arm to help him up, but his legs buckled. He was too weak, the smoke inhalation having already taken its toll. I tried to pull him, but he was dead weight. I can't, he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. The alarm was a deafening pulse. The roar of the fire was getting closer. We were running out of time. I knew I couldn't carry him all the way to the main exit. It was too far. My mind raced, frantically searching for a solution. It was then, in that moment of pure, unadulterated terror, that the encounter happened. A firefighter burst through the door, a massive figure silhouetted against the hellish glow of the hallway. He was covered in gear, his face obscured by a mask and helmet, but his eyes, visible through the visor, locked onto mine. They weren't frantic or panicked. They were calm, steady, and filled with an incredible, grounding reassurance. He didn't shout. His voice, muffled through the respirator, was a low, even command. "Get him to the window. Now, I'll be right behind you." It wasn't the words themselves, but the absolute certainty with which he spoke them. In his eyes, I saw not a hero from a movie, but a man doing his job. A man who was walking into the heart of my crisis and offering a lifeline not just of action, but of profound human solidarity. In that split-second exchange, a silent promise was made. "I am here. You are not alone." It was a connection so powerful, so unexpected, that it cut through my fear like a blade. All the noise, the alarm, the roaring flames, seemed to fade into the background. There was only the task, the shared purpose. I saw his plan. The window, the fire escape on this side of the building. It was our only chance. This stranger's presence, his unwavering calm, ignited something in me. It wasn't just adrenaline anymore. It was a fierce, protective resolve. I looked at Arthur, his frail body trembling, his face a mask of confusion. The thought of my own father, alone, scared, flooded my mind with such force it almost brought me to my knees. The guilt I'd carried for months, the Sundays I'd missed, the calls I'd ignored. It all coalesced into a single, overwhelming feeling: empathy. It was a raw, aching empathy that I had, in my professional life, learned to suppress. I couldn't fail this man. Failing him would feel like failing my own father. I leaned close to Arthur's ear, my voice no longer shaking. "Arthur, I'm going to get you out of here. Promise. Just hold on to me." I hooked my arms under his, using a lifting technique I hadn't practiced since nursing school. He was heavier than he looked. My back screamed in protest, but I ignored it. Fueled by the firefighter's calm and the image of my father's face, I found a strength I didn't know I possessed. I wasn't just a nurse following a protocol. I was a daughter, moved by a love that I had neglected for far too long, saving a man who had become a stand-in for the father I missed. I dragged him, step by agonizing step, toward the window, the firefighter clearing a path, his presence a silent, steady shield at my back. With a final, desperate heave, we reached the window. The firefighter smashed the glass with a tool from his belt, the sound of it shattering barely audible over the roar of the fire. Cool, clean air rushed in, a blessed relief against my scorched lungs. He helped me hoist Arthur onto the windowsill and then onto the metal platform of the fire escape. The descent was treacherous. Arthur was a dead weight, his body limp against mine. The firefighter guided us from below, his hands steady on the railing, his voice a constant, calming presence. Easy does it. One step at a time. I've got you. He wasn't just speaking to Arthur. He was speaking to me, and I believed him. We finally reached the ground, collapsing onto the wet grass as other emergency crews swarmed around us. Paramedics rushed over, placing an oxygen mask on Arthur's face and checking my vitals. I looked up, searching for the firefighter who had been my anchor, but he was already gone, disappearing back toward the building, toward the flames, just another anonymous hero in the chaos. The rest of the night passed in a surreal haze of ambulance rides, hospital corridors, and police statements. By dawn, the fire was out. Everyone had survived, though several, including Arthur, were being treated for smoke inhalation. The nursing home, my sanctuary of routine, was a blackened, hollowed-out shell. I was eventually cleared to go home, my scrubs reeking of smoke, my body aching, my mind numb with exhaustion. I walked into my silent apartment as the sun was rising, casting long shadows across the floor. The place felt foreign, empty. I sank onto my sofa, the events of the night replaying in my mind. The alarm, the smoke, the fear in Arthur's eyes, and then the firefighter's calm gaze. I thought about how, in my moment of greatest crisis, a complete stranger had connected with me on a purely human level, giving me the strength to do what needed to be done. And then I thought about Arthur, how the fear of losing him had felt so viscerally like the fear of losing my own father. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, showing a missed call from my mother, placed hours ago, right in the middle of the inferno. In the past, seeing that missed call would have brought a familiar pang of guilt, an annoyance I would have pushed aside to deal with later. But now something was different. The guilt was still there, but it was overshadowed by a wave of profound, aching love. I saw their faces, my mother's gentle smile, my father's gruff affection. I saw all the missed Sundays, the birthdays, the simple moments I had traded for the sterile predictability of my job. I had spent years building walls around my heart, convincing myself that my professional duty was a nobler calling than my personal connections. In the smoke and flames, those walls had been burned away. I wasn't a nurse first. I was a daughter. With trembling fingers, I pressed the call button. It was early, but I knew they'd be awake. My mother answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. "Sarah? We saw the news. A fire at a nursing home." We were so worried. Hearing her voice, so full of love and fear for me, broke something open inside me. The tears I hadn't shed all night began to fall, silent tracks on my soot-stained cheeks. "I'm okay, Mom," I managed to choke out. "I'm okay. But I need to come home." There was a pause on the other end, and then I heard my father's voice, closer now. "We're here, sweetheart. We're always here." I spent the next few days with them. We didn't talk much about the fire. We didn't need to. I just existed in their presence. I helped my mom in the garden. I watched old movies with my dad. I let their quiet, unassuming love wash over me, healing the parts of me I didn't even know were broken. I still work as a nurse at a different facility now. The hum of the lights is the same, but I hear it differently. It's no longer a sound that drowns out the world. It's just the background music to a life that is now, finally, whole. The fire took my workplace, but it gave me back my family. It taught me that the most profound emergencies are not always the ones with sirens and flashing lights. Sometimes, they are the quiet, slow-burning crises of the heart. I learned that true strength isn't found in professional detachment, but in the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of human connection. And that sometimes, you have to walk through the fire to find your way back home.